Joining us right now is former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Governor, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
So what's your take of the efforts to secure the border and what a timeline might look like? How do you see it?
Well, if you're going to have a country, you got to have border integrity. We don't on the southern border, and I think enforcing the border through a variety of means, including enhancing with a wall, is appropriate. And it's also good negotiating leverage, by the way.
In terms of paying for it, obviously, Governor, that's the issue. How do you see that working out? I mean, is this going to turn into and escalate into a fight between the U.S. and Mexico, since Donald Trump has been pretty adamant in terms of Mexico paying for that wall?
It may turn into a fight or have a relationship tension, but think of the size and magnitude of it and the unilateral authority that Donald Trump possesses. The estimates to the wall range from $10 billion to maybe as much as $20 billion, but spread over a number of years. That's a large number, but in the context of federal spending, it really isn't. And by the way, Donald Trump can unilaterally impose surcharges, tariffs, or other potential taxes at the border that would allow him to claim Mexico's either directly or indirectly paying for the wall. So he's got a lot of leverage to implement this as he's suggested or threatened.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, this whole idea of an import tax, we've been talking a lot about it. Do you agree with that? Because we're trying to see how he's going to implement his campaign promise, which is lower taxes. You know, a border adjustment tax flies right in the face of that. And I don't know, how does that jive with what you're talking about in terms of a tax on Mexico products?
Well, I think you have to look at it in this way, in terms of the revenues and the costs and the advantages. The border adjustment tax, or so-called BAT tax, has been estimated, depending on how you do it and how large it is, to raise as much as $1 trillion over 10 years. There's a lot of potential concern about the BAT tax, but it is unquestionably a very large revenue raiser. Governor Norquist has said if you then cut other taxes by at least that much or more, so the net effect of the tax reform is neutral or positive in terms of cutting taxes, that at least he would find it acceptable as a net tax cut.
You know, Governor, I had a question. Just when you look at it, it's 1,900 miles, some of it forbidden landscape, very tricky. How are we going to build that out over any kind of reasonable time period? Or will there be walls in some part and then virtual walls, if you will, were heavily guarded? How do you see that unfolding?
Well, as you know, much of the border does have a wall on it already. Much of it does not. Some of the remaining terrain, as you mentioned, is very difficult, including semi-mountainous regions and other problems. And by the way, there's some land ownership rights in Texas as well along the border, so you're going to have to deal with some eminent domain issues. As a practical matter, if they're really going to complete the effort in a couple of years, some of it's probably going to have to be physical structure, some of it may be drones, some of it may be electronic, some of it may be more human resources. But obviously, he's going to make a big piece of progress here in the next 24 months, and I think he's going to do it. He's got the ability to pay for it.
This is, Governor, it's Stegan McDowell. This is one of myriad issues that the Trump administration has tackled just in his first little more than a week in the White House. Do you worry, given, because some things have gone well, some things not, like the executive order on some immigration? It wasn't rolled out with care, if you will. Do you worry that this White House is getting bogged down with too many things, and that kind of central promise of tax reform and growing the economy might be on the back burner?
I think you wouldn't describe his first week as bogged down. You might describe it as hyper-energetic.
No, I just was talking about bogged down with tax reform. That's it.
I understand. I think that is a potential concern, because that is one of the main things. And as has been said, you want to keep the main things the main things. I think the proof will be in the pudding if you fast forward 9 or 12 months. If tax reform gets done, nobody's going to remember that they were a little off message or a little off focus in week number 1 or week number 2.
Maybe not, but the whole border adjustment tax, has that muddied the waters? I mean, has this become more complicated than was promised?
Yeah, and keep in mind, it's the House Republicans that came up primarily with the border adjustment tax. Donald Trump actually was somewhat concerned about it a few weeks ago. He since maybe has warmed up, or his team has warmed up to a little bit. And again, Maria, the trick is, how do you do it? The border adjustment tax has got a lot of critics, including people who think it's a camel's nose under the tent to a VAT tax or a value-added tax. But again, until you see the other side of the ledger, the tax cuts that people are going to get, especially everyday Americans who are middle income, in exchange for having to bear the burden of the VAT tax, unless you see the other side of the ledger on the relief, you really can't say whether the package overall is a good idea or not.
All right, so do you think we will get tax reform this year then, Governor? I mean, that's what we're all wondering, because now we're expecting that we know what it looks like in the first 200 days, but we're going to see implementation second half of the year. Is that what you think?
I think so. And look, the Republican Congress and the leaders have been salivating over tax reform for a decade. This is their brief, hopefully not brief, but their shining moment to get it done. And if they don't, that's going to be a very big, F on the report card.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan continue to say, look, we know what this window of opportunity is. We're not going to waste it.